Welcome to the Moral Courage Podcast, lessons from the study of Rabbi Harold Schulweis of blessed memory, a podcast addressing today's trends and headlines through interviews and conversations with Jewish leaders, inspired by the works of Rabbi Harold Schulweis that make Jewish wisdom more accessible, inclusive, and relevant to today's complicated world. Our guests share their Jewish journeys and discuss how Rabbi Schulweis's wisdom provides inspiration and guidance to us today. Hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach, Senior Rabbi at Temple Etz Chaim in Thousand Oaks, California, and board member of the Harold Schulweis Institute, an affiliate of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California.
All right, it's so good to be here. Rabbi Ed Feinstein, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Ari. I hope you're well.
Thank God, we're doing okay. So welcome to Moral Courage, this podcast where we have been talking about Rabbi Schulweis, his Torah, his times, his life. I feel like there's nobody maybe alive right now who knows those things better than you. Maybe you more than some of his family, because you wrote a dissertation on him. But if we go back earlier, how did you first meet him?
I first met him when I was 16 years old, and he came to Valley Beth Shalom in 1970. I was a rambunctious, rebellious, pain-in-the-neck teenager here in the San Fernando Valley, belonged to Beth Kodesh, which is a synagogue that has merged twice and changed its name.
Right, of blessed
but it
memory.
Was way out in the West Valley. I had a lovely, wonderful, kind, and generous rabbi, Rabbi Eli Shochet. May he continue to live to 120. And my family, we were not big shul goers, but my family was very committed to Jewish life. And my father in particular was very interested in Jewish ideas. And so every Friday night we would sit down to have Friday night dinner, and my father would conduct a discussion over some big Jewish idea. Israel, Zionism, civil rights for African Americans, feminism, the Vietnam War. And these things made their way to our Shabbos table. When Rabbi Schulweis arrived in 1970, we started going to shul to hear him, because here was a man who was really committed to ideas. It's one of these people, I don't know if you've ever met people like this, who ideas keep him up at night. And Rabbi Schulweis was really a man committed to ideals. So he fit really nicely into the culture of my family. I met him, actually, there's a wonderful story that I've told many times.
Yeah.
I had fallen in love with a girl at Camp Ramah, and her name was Nina Bieber. And she was 2 years younger than me and adorably cute. I thought she was gorgeous and beautiful, and still do think that. And so after camp was over, I took my entire salary for 9 weeks of Camp Ramah and invested it in one date. And I took her on a Saturday night to the Sea Lion restaurant in Malibu, where we sat by the window and watched the waves crash against the window and ate halibut. And then I took her to the Hollywood Bowl for a concert of Rodgers and Hammerstein great hits. And then I put my arm around this beautiful young woman and I said, "It's Saturday night and the stars are out. What would you like to do now?" And she said, "It's slichas. Let's go to shul." And that was not what I had in mind as a 16-year-old. But she said, "There's a new rabbi at Valley Beth Shalom in the valley. Let's go hear him." So we drove out to VBS. The synagogue was packed full to the back. There must have been 1,800 people here. We sat in the back with a bunch of our teenage friends. And I watched this rabbi just blow this room away. His oratory, his concept, his ideas, the music that they brought for the service, it just so moved me. So I like to say that I fell in love twice that night, because I married one of them and I ended up working for the other. And the joke is that sometimes I forget which one is which. But I married Nina, and Harold became my mentor. And so through high school, I would go and hear him in Hebrew High. I was in Hebrew High with his son, with Ethan, and we used to go and hear him all the time, Rabbi Schulweis. And then when I went to rabbinical school, he was my teacher. He was like the most intimidating teacher you ever had. And when I became a rabbi, came out here, I talked to him many times. He was one of the people largely responsible for my becoming a rabbi, because I was a kid with many, many, many more questions than I had answers. And I asked him, "Can I be a rabbi under these circumstances?" He said, "Absolutely. That your questions are so good. You deserve to have this position in the community." So I came out here. I worked for 7 or 8 years in Dallas, Texas, as a day school director,
Right.
and my dad came to VBS. And the wonderful thing is that he would surreptitiously tape the rabbi's sermons and lectures, and then mail me the cassette tapes, so I got to hear him. And then when I came to LA, I was working as the director of Camp Ramah, and on Thursday nights or Wednesday nights, teaching a confirmation class here at VBS. And Rabbi Schulweis was teaching with me or next door to me. And one night after 3 years, he said, "Come into my office." He said to me, "When are you going to grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm a camp director. That's not enough." He said, "No, you need to come work here." And it was when Stuart Vogel, my dear friend, was leaving to become the senior rabbi of Temple Aliyah. I was invited to come and work with Rabbi Schulweis. And so that's how I began the professional relationship. But he has always been my teacher and my mentor. And he's always been a person whose soul I so admire.
Wow. Do you remember what he talked about on Slicha?
Yes,
What's he saying?
I know this sermon. I know this. He talked about Tzimtzum, the Kabbalistic idea that before God created the world, God pulled into God's self and concentrated God's self at one point. And it's from that point that God created reality, created our world. And he said, that's what we need to do. We need to pull in all the different constituencies and interests and concerns of the Jewish world into one point. And we need, out of that point needs to flow a new Judaism. And then he said that has to happen to individuals as well, because we are so spread out. We are so busy. We are so concerned with so many things we are doing. In order to be creative, to concentrate the self on one thing. And what he was inviting all of us to do was to imagine that we had within us the possibilities of creating a new Judaism, a new Jewish community, a new Jewish way of life. And remember, this is 1970. This is September 1970. It's still in the sort of rush after the Six-Day War. It's still in this time when Jews are discovering the Holocaust, discovering Israel, and really discovering their own place in America. This is the beginning of second, third generation American Jewish life. And he was telling us that we had the capacity to create a Jewish life that would fill our needs. And that's what that sermon, I can remember it now, and it's 52 years, 55 years later.
Wow.
I remember that sermon because I remember how astonishing it was. And I'll tell you what was astonishing. I actually wrote about this in my book, because the things that rabbis were talking about, he didn't talk about any of them. He didn't tell us we weren't Jewish enough. He didn't yell at us for not coming to shul. He didn't tell us to keep kosher or Shabbos. He didn't tell us to not intermarry. He didn't push at any of those buttons, which were the buttons of American Judaism in 1970. He simply said to us, we have the creativity and capacity to create a new Judaism for this moment in our history. And that's something that I always admired about him, because for him, Judaism spoke in the present tense. For the rabbis that trained me and the rabbis that I knew and the rabbis I grew up with, Judaism was always about yesterday, about this authority or that scholar or this sage. It was always about keeping the tradition, which is what we did yesterday. And while Schulweis had reverence for that, what he really was interested in was a Judaism for now. What does it say to me and my world and my circumstance now? And that's what he said on that night.
Was there pushback? I mean, not that you know what the board said in 1970.
I was 16 years old.
Right, sure.
Pushback.
But from the Jewish world,
of course there was pushback. There was always pushback. Look, one of the things you've got to know, my dear brother, is that this was the most courageous man I ever met in my life.
Yeah.
Because he was ferocious and fearless, right? There was pushback plenty. When he came to the synagogue and started talking about Christian rescuers of the Holocaust, this was way before Schindler's List was made. He was one of the first to start saying, we need to celebrate the Christians who risked their lives and their families to rescue Jews. There was pushback like, why are you Why are you ameliorating the catastrophe? Why are you overlooking the horror? And he said, I'm not overlooking the horror, but I want to find something that I can save. When he's talked about Darfur and the ethical responsibility of Jews, not just to protect our own from genocide, but to protect others from genocide, he got a ton of pushback. On this notion, he got a ton of pushback. He got an amazing amount of pushback, of resistance, of anger, of just pure anger, because it's not what people wanted to hear. They wanted to hear a sermon which made them feel guilty about not keeping kosher and then go home and eat treif.
Right.
That was the game of American Judaism. And he said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that because it's inauthentic and it lacks integrity. Let's talk about a Judaism that speaks to you now, not the Judaism of your parents. It's not the Judaism of your Zayda, of your grandparents. It's got to be a Judaism that you embrace. And he got a ton of pushback on that.
You were his successor in so many ways, and also very different from him. Did he imbue this in you? Did you discover it on your own? Were you encouraged by him to like?
Well, it's like any relationship of a teacher and a student, right? I told you I grew up in a home where these things were being argued all the time. My parents are kibbutzniks. My parents got to Israel with Hashem Eretz Zair and built a kibbutz, and then got thrown off the kibbutz because they lost a political fight in the kibbutz. So these Jewish revolution is in my blood, literally, right? But the point was, here was a teacher who gave me a language in which I could accept Judaism and enter into its process of development. And that was what I needed. And here was a person who gave me the confidence to be able to stand up and do that. He was a paragon of courage. And that's something that was so important to me. And he was also, like, I got to tell you something. He was not a gregarious man. Like he didn't like glad hand. He didn't make he's terrible at conversation. He had no small talk. You'd sit down to lunch with him and you wanted to talk about the Dodgers or the stock market or the computer you bought. And he wants to know, have you been reading Buber? Have you ever read Soloveitchik? I mean, he loved music and he wished he could play the violin. He played it at an elementary level, but he had this comedy routine he would do every Purim. It was like Henny Youngman, if you know who that is, or Jack Benny. It was these old comedians used to pull out a violin and it would become part of the shtick. And that's exactly what he did. He did shtick. I don't think he could play very well at all. But the truth was he loved music. Music was very important to him. He was a kind human being.
Yeah.
He was a deeply, deeply kind, compassionate, committed, concerned, caring human being. And that's what that's in the end what matters, right?
I got to inherit some of his books. Right, Good. He had quite a library in between him and some of my other teachers.
Yeah, I have some of them here too.
I've got Lieber's books and I've got Pascal's books. I've got all of these books, and I noticed in he has like next to each paragraph, he's got like a check mark or a star.
Right. He writes these notes that nobody can read.
Sure.
The funny thing was that even he couldn't read them. He would come Shabbos morning with a page of notes on the Parsha, and he'd spend the whole time squinting at it because he couldn't read his own handwriting. Like he turned to me and said, "What does that say?" I'm not sure. It looks to me.
Right. That makes me feel better. I was this past Shabbos like looking at my notes, going like, I don't know what I'm writing here.
Well, you're in the right tradition, my brother. There you are.
Sure. So what was a day or a week in the life of Schulweis at work like?
So I came in, like, so he hires me, right? So I come in on like day one, right? And I come in and I have an office next to his, and I start work and there's things I need to do and people I need to see and appointments I'm trying to make. He comes in around 10 o'clock in the morning, picks up his mail, pours himself a cup of coffee, either comes into my office and plants himself down or invites me into his office, leans across the desk and asks a question. I remember the first week I come in and he leans across the desk and I think he's going to ask something about God and Torah and morality. And he leans across and says, "Ed, who is Howard Stern? And is he Jewish?" You remember Howard Stern was a shock jock that was on the radio. He apparently found it on the radio on his way over, and he was shocked. He said, and then we had this 2-hour conversation about the coarsening of American culture. And at the end of the conversation, he would say, "We have to do something about this." And he would tell me to go run a program. Now, mind you, this happened 5 days a week. So 5 days a week, we have a 2-hour seminar on contemporary culture, on Judaism, on philosophy, on ideas. And then I walk out with an assignment. And I realized pretty soon that one of my jobs wasn't to run his programs, it was to curate his ideas, because he couldn't possibly run a synagogue. I mean, you could have run 20 synagogues on what he comes up with in a week. Right. But that was his thing. He was a ferocious insomniac. So he'd spent all night long reading, and he'd come in the morning with a question, and we would begin arguing, talking, and it was just remarkable. It was a pro seminar in contemporary American Jewish sociology, and that I had every single weekday morning.
And then he takes some of these ideas and writes out a sermon.
He took them and spent all summer long thinking about how to make this happen. Then he would prepare a sermon. Sometimes it was early. He'd tell me Pesach that he'd finished his Rosh Hashanah sermon. I hate him for that.
Right.
And then they had a board retreat, and he would present the idea to the board. And if the board didn't tell him it was a horrible idea, that was the sermon. And it was remarkable. I mean, just the fruitfulness of this mind, the fact that he kept finding new ideas, because for him, nothing was out of bounds and nothing was uninteresting, right? The Darfur, the Jewish World Watch, was born out of a set of editorials written by Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times about what was happening in Sudan in the Civil War. And so he comes in and says, we have to do something about this, right? I mean, each one of these, and all of the things that he did came out of these things, right? Out of his mind, his thinking. He had a capacity, which I'm so jealous of. He had a capacity to just see over the horizon, to see the next idea, the next issue, and to see what would resonate with the community. And it was just this remarkable ability.
I mean, your dad sent you tapes from Friday nights. I know that Mark Leiner would record services on Friday nights, first surreptitiously, and finally at some point he talked to Schulweis and Schulweis goes, "Just give me the tape recorder. I'll put it up on the Bima, it's better recording."
My dad had a little Walkman that he would record,
which is also incredible. I mean, now we have YouTube and whatever else, but it's not quite the same. But every Friday, I mean, I've gone back to the archives just to listen to him sometimes.
Every Friday,
there's
45 minutes with footnotes, with literature, with ideas, with quips. Because the crazy thing was, for a man who was kind of shy in public, when you put him on the Bima and in front of a microphone, he was just ferocious. The oratory, the humor, the pathos, it was remarkable. And then the best of his sermons became articles in Moment magazine or in Shema magazine, right? The best of his stuff was then published. And so there's a big archive of published material that you can find. And the best of the best got gathered up into his books. And each of his books reflects another aspect of his character. So when I was doing my research, I realized that this is a scholar. He's a theologian, he's a prophet, and he's a community builder. And he writes a book in each area. His magnum opus, or his most theological book, is For Those Who Can't Believe, which is the summary of his theology, right? His prophetic book is called Conscience, right? But the third thing, the community builder book, I could never find. There's a book of essays that he put out called In God's Mirror, but that didn't do it. And then here's a crazy story. When he passed away and we were going through his things and unpacking his office, behind a bookshelf, we found a manuscript. We found a manuscript of the book of community building. It was that manuscript, right? And I looked at it and I said, oh my God, it was called Godliness. This was the book about the third aspect of his rabbinate. And he never got to publish it because he never finished it because he's a perfectionist when he wrote. And he could never give it over to the editor if he didn't feel like it was completely done. And it was clear that this manuscript wasn't. I have the manuscript. And that proved to me that my impulse was right. Theologian, rabbi is theologian, rabbi is prophet, rabbi is community builder. Those are the three faces of his rabbinate, and those are the three big books that he wrote.
Is there something missing? I mean, from him, that's perfect. For the contemporary rabbi, is there anything missing from that? Not
Sure.
everybody. I mean, most rabbis aren't prophets. Few are theologians.
All right, no, but so this is the thing. So when I began to write my dissertation, I was writing it at JTS in the education school. And they said to me, this is great, but we need something more. We need to make this a story of education. And I said, okay, well, let's look at this. Here are three roles that rabbis play. Rabbis can be theologians, rabbis can be prophets, and rabbis can be community builders. What are the other roles? Rabbi is pastor, right? Rabbi as interfaith interfaith dialogue person. Rabbi, I mean, there are other
fundraiser.
Roles. Rabbi is fundraiser. No, rabbi is administrator, right? There are other, rabbi is educator. There are other roles that he didn't play. And so I wrote a paper for my dissertation. It was the introduction that didn't get published, but it was a paper on training rabbis for these different roles, and that what we have in Schulweis is a case study of the three that he occupied. But Ari Averbach is going to occupy different roles. Ed Feinstein is going to occupy different. One of the things I discovered right away when I came to VBS is that for this most incredibly brilliant, visionary rabbi, he was a lousy administrator. And I had to take on a large part of the administration of the synagogue. He just wasn't interested in it.
Sure.
So I took that on, right? He also didn't like kids. He was actually afraid of children, right? So I became rabbi as educator. That was something that I was comfortable doing. So each of us has a different profile of the roles that we play in the communities that we serve. And that's part of it. So that's true. There was stuff left out of his rabbinate, right? And he had a rule, just to give you a sense of him, because you'll laugh. He had a rule that you were not permitted to bring children into the sanctuary on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, especially when his sermon was being given.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one story about once a lady snuck her baby in, and the baby made one little teeny coo, coo, and he stopped and stared at this woman until she got up in tears and walked out with the kid. Like, you would never do that, and I would never do that. But that was Schulweis. I mean, he was an adult, and he wanted to say to the community, Judaism is for adults. It's not juvenile. It's not just for children. That was a revolution in his time. I have a different approach. You have a different approach.
Sure. I mean, I'm fighting the opposite battle. Is so many people nowadays think of Judaism as up until 7th grade.
Right. And so his idea, why did he speak in the vocabulary? You mean the joke was that when you joined VBS, you got a philosophical dictionary as part of your membership,
right?
Because he used words that he knew none of us understand: teleological, axiological, and the reason he did that was because he wanted to make a claim, which is that this is for grown-ups. This is powerfully adult. This speaks to the dilemmas and the questions and the problems of adulthood. It's not just for kids. Yes, it's warm and loving and kind. I used to say that's for Feinstein, right? But when Schulweis spoke, it was for grown-ups.
I mean, right, and you're incredible at bridging that, at talking to the kids, but also, I mean, just thinking about what you've taught me about, the story of Noah's Ark, and to read it finally as an adult. And that opened my, I mean, as one example of like looking at Judaism through an eyes of a grown-up is amazing. What was it? What's it like working in his shadow? I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just like people want to talk to him. People want to talk to the head rabbi. He's got ideas. You're the curator. You're also trying to have your own meetings and make yourself a rabbi there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, was a very big place, and one rabbi can't cover it all. And there were constituencies of the congregation that he didn't he didn't have he didn't care. He said he didn't have time for them, right? Namely, school families,
Right.
right? So I became the rabbi for the kids and for their families. It's a huge population. What's ironic, Ari, is that those families have now grown into later adulthood, like I have. I had little kids when I first came here.
Right.
Now I'm a grandfather. All my friends that were the school families when he was the rabbi, they're now my constituency here at VBS, right?
Right.
So we met different needs at the congregation. We met different needs. We met different populations. We spoke in different languages. I was willing to do things, that he wasn't interested in doing, and he was involved in things that were way over my head, right? But we got along really well because we deeply, deeply loved and respected each other, and there was a lot of love there, really a lot of love, and I still talk to him. Listen, a soul that powerful doesn't die when a body dies. Right. So I still talk to him. He's still here in my office all the time, telling me what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong. And when I need help, I ask him for it.
Right.
And he's still around. Now, he would deny that because he never believed in the supernatural, but he's wrong. Right.
But I mean, this is the immortality of influence, right?
Immortality of influence, but there's immortality of immortality now. So he's still around.
So why write your dissertation on him?
Oh, because I wanted to sum up his life, and I thought I understood him, and I thought that his rabbinate, the quality of his rabbinate, taught me something about being a rabbi, and I thought other colleagues, you and me, and our friends and colleagues who work in this, would enjoy and would cherish and benefit from knowing his insights about being. One of the things he taught me that is very rare, and we don't teach this in rabbi school, remember, is that you have to shape your own rabbinate. You don't let them shape it. You shape it. You decide where you're going to put your time and your effort, where you're going to invest yourself. And the way that he shaped his rabbinate and the revolutions that he brought to American Judaism through his rabbinate, I thought I wanted to share with the Jewish community. And I wanted to leave a legacy. I mean, the problem is that, the next generation thinks that they know more and they have it all worked out, and they forget how wonderful these colleagues were. And because he was so ahead of his time, he's more relevant now than he was then, right? So anyway, that I wanted to do this, and I wanted to spend a lot of time in his papers. When he moved out of the office, they moved all of his papers, so I rescued them and pulled them into my office. And I've gone through his files, and I have his correspondence. I have, for example, I found the correspondence with Mordechai Kaplan. And the whole file that began in 1952 when he left New York and continued until Kaplan's death, right? I found his correspondence with Martin Buber. I found drafts of his papers. I mean, all kinds of treasures that I found in his files.
Yeah, are they scanned? Are they saved? Are they just in a file somewhere?
They're in files in the library, yeah.
Wow.
But they're not scanned yet because there's a lot. There's a lot there.
Sure, right. Some summer intern just goes through there and.
Well, you remember that he lived at a time before email and before digital records. So you and I have, a zillion emails saved, but he has all of his as written correspondence that was either Xeroxed or carbon copied.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder what his rabbinate would be like if he were around now. Would he? I mean, he didn't use the computer really. He had somebody take his notes.
It isn't the digital part. I'll tell you what the part is. And I wrote about this, and you can see this already in his writings. He was a rationalist. He was an acolyte of Mordechai Kaplan, right? Things like mysticism, supernatural, what we would call spirituality, completely escaped him. He had no idea, right? He read Heschel because he found Heschel's scholarship engaging, but he didn't get Heschel at all. And when the Jewish world turned from the rationality of Mordechai Kaplan to the spirituality of Abraham Heschel, it left him behind. It really left him behind. There is a telling indication at the end of his book, For Those Who Can't Believe. The book, For Those Who Can't Believe, is a brilliant book. And it's written to an interlocutor, an imaginary interlocutor named David, who comes to him and says, I want to be Jewish. I just don't know what I believe. And the whole book is an answer to that kid. And he gives him this whole understanding of a rational, intellectual Judaism. And at the end of the book, Schulweis confesses that David comes to him and says, all that's great, Rabbi, but I can't believe that either. And Schulweis says the problem is what David can believe, what David accepts as authentic, he can't accept as intellectually valid. And what he accepts as intellectually valid, he can't accept as authentically Jewish. And he gets mad at David and says, this is a problem of a superficial Jew. And I argued in the end of my book that no, Harold, it's not a superficial Jew. That's the difference between your generation and David's generation. Your generation was raised in deep, deep rooted Yiddishkeit, and you were looking for an intellectual way to understand your Judaism. That's my parents, that's Mordechai Kaplan, and that's Harold Schulweis. David was raised in my generation, or Ari, your generation, in which he wanted something more. He wanted a spirituality that gave him a sense of his place in the universe. And he didn't need it to be rational. He didn't want it to be rational. He wanted it to be a little bit mystical and emotional. And that's a world that Harold couldn't understand. Rabbi Schulweis couldn't understand. It's the difference, if you know intellectual stuff, between modernity and postmodernity. Modernity says, I want it rational. Postmodernity says, I can live with the irrational alongside the rational. That works for me. And that's the difference. And so, in a certain terrible sense, he was perfect for his generation, but inappropriate for the next.
That's amazing. You mentioned that he went to the board with what his sermon's going to be for Yontif.
Yeah.
There's a line that I've heard said, attributed to him, which is, I don't go to board meetings and the board doesn't come to services.
Yeah, right.
Was that something that he...
Oh, yeah, he said it all the time.
Yeah.
He said, you don't come to my services, I don't go to your board meetings. We have it worked out perfectly. He did go to board meetings when he needed to go, But he wasn't interested in the administration and organization of the congregation. He was interested in Jewish ideas. For him, the synagogue was a laboratory. This was his living laboratory to form and shape and imagine and create a new Judaism for the late 20th century. So what you board members do that's not interesting to him.
Yeah. I mean, and he did. I feel like the second half of the 20th century, we were living in a Kaplan Heschel Judaism, right? Theologically, it was a little bit Heschel. Institutionally, it was a little bit Kaplan. We became shuls with pools, even if we didn't have pools. Went from stiebels to community centers, right? Go to VBS now.
What happened was it was Kaplan. From the end of the Second World War till 1990, it was Kaplan. Look, the rabbi I grew up with, a wonderful, wonderful rabbi, he talked about Jewish peoplehood. He didn't talk about God. He talked about intermarriage. He talked about Israel. He talked about anti-Semitism. He talked about Jewish identity. He talked about assimilation.
Sure, right. Coming out of World War II, you have to.
Those are Kaplanian themes. Starting in 1990, the world changed. And spirituality became a part of the culture. Look, institutionally, you had BJ in New York.
Yeah.
BJ in New York, B'nai Jeshurun in New York. A new kind of synagogue where Heschel, where spirituality and music and dance and emotion. Here in LA, we had Friday Night Live with Craig Taubman and David Wolpe, right? Then Ikar began. We had a different kind of Judaism, a very emotional Judaism. He used to call it expressive Judaism. He didn't know what to do with it. I remember it was beyond him. He didn't know what to do with it. He maintained his own Judaism, and those people respected him and revered him because when it came time to think about ideas, he's the guy you want to talk to. But when it came time to have an emotional religious experience, he didn't have any truck with religious experience. It didn't go anywhere for him. Right? Just like it didn't go anywhere for Kaplan, right? And so it was kind of watching the generation shift at that point.
Is that where we see the difference between a Friday night in 1980? There's 1,000 people at VBS for a service.
Yeah.
And you go to VBS now, and And it's not, right? You're in the chapel, not always. I mean, sometimes there's remote, there's other things going on, but it's not 1,000
Well,
people.
there's things that change. I mean, first of all, the community has changed, right? We have we're dealing with a different community with a different rhythm of life.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it. Part of it is, who the synagogue appeals to. That's also part of it. Remember, 1970, who lives in the San Fernando Valley? In 1970, the San Fernando Valley was the fastest growing suburb in America. In 1970, you had thousands of Jewish couples who had moved from their cities of origin, New York, Toronto, Philadelphia, and moved to the San Fernando Valley. So their families were far away.
Hmm.
They didn't have families. So when he proposes the idea of chavurot, it comes on immediately because this is the family that you would like to have, but your family lives in Queens, New York, or Boston, or Philadelphia or Toronto, right? And so the world changes. You come to shul because you want to meet Jews because you've moved into a neighborhood in the San Fernando Valley where there aren't any Jews on your block. And you grew
Yeah.
up in Brooklyn where everybody was Jewish. And so you created your own Jewish neighborhood in the shul. Now, what happens over time? Our families mature and we have in-laws and we have family and we have grandparents and our neighborhoods become more Jewish and there are other institutions that take our, and slowly the synagogue changes because people's needs change.
I mean, also, I think with Chavurot, you're telling people own your Judaism, and they go, "Oh, I'm gonna have Shabbos dinner tonight at home." And so instead of
Right.
going to shul and hearing this amazing sermon, being part of this experience, to have 8 people, my new friends, my new family, sit around my
Right.
Shabbos table for 3
Right.
hours having
Right.
wine and chicken, like that becomes the way to celebrate. He almost helped set that up because he's
Uh-huh.
telling people, you own it. Judaism lives not only in the synagogue, it also lives in your home.
Exactly right.
There are classes on Schulweis. We're doing this podcast to keep, his legacy going. What parts of his legacy still matter most? What should we be teaching now about Schulweis?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. That's a very, very deep question. Well, first of all, the moral courage of a rabbi who looked into the world and was offended by the evil of the world and was offended by the small-mindedness of his own Jewish community and was pushed was really felt that the community was bigger than it knew about it. It wanted us to think big. Right? He talked about global Judaism. And what he meant by Judaism as a global religion, which means we have something to say about life. We have something to say about this moment in our history. We're not just talking about how you build your sukkah or how you keep your pots and pans or how we're talking about the world. And God, right now, I always imagine what he'd be talking about right now, right? So
Yeah.
you're talking to the world. We have an ethic. We own a moral truth. And that moral truth has to be spoken about frequently in relation to the world outside. That's the most important lesson I think that comes from him. Second of all is this idea that to believe in God is to feel compelled. He called it godliness. He said, let's take the language of God and turn it into verbs and adverbs. And he meant that. That wasn't just a dodge to get out of theology. He really felt that. He really felt that we have a moral obligation, that the world claims us, claims our ethics, claims our ethical action in the world. And that sense that Judaism demands something serious from you. It demands something serious from you, and not simply your assent to platitudes of justice, but go out there and make justice happen. That's his notion of godliness. That's a second sort of element of his idea, I would say, right? And I would say the third, which is related to the first two, which is that let's talk in the present tense. Judaism of the present tense. It is important to revere the past. It is important to learn and know and carry the tradition. But tradition isn't the full total. Tradition is only the beginning of Judaism. It has to live now, and it has to speak to our lives right now. It has to speak to the way the world is right now. And if it's not speaking to the world right now, It's not speaking a language that it ought to be, that makes any sense, that resonates with its moral duty in the world. Does that make some sense? I mean, I'm trying to, you have such a lifetime of richness, but these are ideas. These are not ideas, they're orientations to Jewish life that I think they're so critical right now.
Yeah. I preach a Schulweis theology, especially to the kids here. It's one that they can understand and get behind. It's something that I believe in. And I wonder, right, what he would say about this moment. And how do you say it knowing that your donors, your board of directors, the people who are making decisions, I mean, he was maybe above that,
No,
but
no, he was concerned. He was always concerned that people heard him. He was really worried. Not that they would say no, but that they wouldn't actually hear what he's trying to say. So there really was a concern to make sure that the message was conveyed.
yeah. And how do you say it when people really think differently,
Mm.
right? And you've gotten up there on the bima and spoken your truth,
Well,
spoken
because I'm an
your
old guy and I have a pension, so I can get
right,
away with it.
right. You can do it, and others can't. And how do you toe that line? How do you, whatever the right phrase is, how do you tiptoe around it? Because it's hard being the one in the room with a microphone.
Yeah. On the other hand, I come to shul. I can go many different places on a Saturday morning or a Friday night. I can get my truth from many different places, but I have come to synagogue because I have faith and confidence that this rabbi who has immersed him or herself in Torah brings some of the eternal truth of Torah to me to bear upon my life. If you don't do that, you have disappointed me. If you don't say something important to me, you have disappointed me because I took the time and the effort to come to you and I'm listening for your Torah. And if you don't speak to my soul, to my conscience, to my mind, if you don't say something important and timely and powerful, then you have really disappointed me, Rabbi. Right? And I understand that you're under a lot of pressure because there's a guy in the third row who bankrolls and you don't want to piss him off. I get that. But I also want to know, what are you saying to my kid who came with me, my 20-year-old who came with me, who hates synagogue, and I forced him to put on a clean shirt and come to synagogue. Are you going to say something to him? Are you going to show him that this tradition has something to say to his life and his circumstance right now? Or are you going to dodge that and make him and either entertain him or make him feel guilty, or are you going to say something to him that opens his eyes to his own life and his own circumstance and helps him find meaning in his existence? That's the question every rabbi has to answer. And frankly, I'm more concerned with that 20-year-old sitting in the last row because I told you that was me. That was me. I was 16 years old sitting there with my girlfriend in the last row, hoping a rabbi would actually say something to me.
Yeah.
I'm sitting back there. You talk to me. Yes, you may upset that donor in the third row, but if you don't touch me, you have committed a much bigger sin.
Yeah. Thanks for that pressure. I appreciate that. I mean, it's something we struggle with, and every week I get up there and go.
Absolutely,
And,
me
and
too. So
in addition to like one of the things you taught in rabbinical school was like some weeks you work every day on your sermon, and you get up there Friday night or Saturday whenever you give your big sermon, and you give and you've worked on it, and you feel good about it. And some weeks you got 5 funerals, 3 baby namings, back-to-back meetings,
and
things
your
at
kid
night.
has the flu,
You're,
right?
right, and you get up there, and it's Friday night. You go, oh shoot, what's the parsha this week? What can I say?
Right.
What's my note that I can barely read? You get, and luckily we have enough knowledge to get up there and say something. But some weeks you got something put together. So for you saw him from the back row when you're 16, and he's Rabbi Schulweis. Then he becomes your teacher in rabbinical school, and he's Rabbi Schulweis. And then at some point, you're his colleague. I grew up with him as Rabbi Schulweis. The joke was that his wife called him Rabbi. At what point do
No.
you? I remember at some point I was talking to you, and you said something about Harold, and I was thinking, who is Harold? So when did it switch for you that you were?
Oh, 5 years after I took the job.
Yeah,
When I walked into his office, he said, "Call me Harold." I couldn't call him Harold. I couldn't call him Harold. I don't even know if I ever called him Harold to his face, right? No, it wasn't that. See, this is where you're a little bit wrong, and I appreciate this the
Yeah.
opportunity. There were rabbis of his generation whose wives called them rabbi. Yes, there were, and there were rabbis who thought rabbi was their first name.
Right.
There were guys like that, and I know people like that. I met people like that. He wasn't that way. He really wasn't that way. He really understood that this is a role he plays and a job he has and an opportunity that life has given him that he cherished. But he didn't define himself that way. He was Schulweis. He had his own way of making it happen, right? And there wasn't an arrogance about it. I got to tell you, the first time, so the very, very first week I'm working here as his assistant, as rabbi, we have a meeting with bar mitzvah parents, with 3 years out of bar mitzvah, prospective, right. And he gets up and he introduces himself by saying, "I'm Harold Schulweis, one of the rabbis here at Valley Beth Shalom." And I almost fell off my chair.
Wow.
What do you mean, one of the rabbis? You're the rabbi,
Yeah.
the rabbi. But he didn't feel that way. There was a humility about this, and he understood. He never was that way, and he was very, very, very kind to me in giving me opportunities, never holding back, never saying, "I'm the rabbi, I got to." On the contrary, he would give me so many opportunities because he really wanted partnership and he wanted friends. He cherished you, Ari. Come on.
Yeah.
He loved you.
But
I mean, you were one of the proteges that he was most proud of, that went through the system and decided to carry forward this kind of work. You were precious to him.
But when I got to talk to him, it was still godly, right? It was still talking to authority. And maybe it's just...
So I was that. Look, I told you, we never made small talk. I took him out to lunch and we talked boober. It was just this kind of stuff. It was now Malka, his wife, is a different story. He and Malka had an unusually close, loving, kind, sweet, childlike, romantic relationship. They were crazy in love with each other till the day they left this world. I crazy in love with it. First of all, he didn't. He that was his girlfriend. He never had a girlfriend. She was it, right? He was an only child, so she rescued him from loneliness and from his shyness. She was the only one whose mind matched his. I remember doing a sermon once. He gave a sermon once, and it wasn't very good. And he sits down next to me and he says, "Good thing Malka's not here." Like, there are 300 people sitting in front of him who didn't understand the sermon, didn't bother him. But that Malka might have heard about. She was his muse. Mm-hmm. She was his critic. She was his sounding board. She was his support and his protection. And she knew everything he knew. She read everything he read. But she had a quality that he didn't have. She was quick. Rabbi Schulweis was very deep, but he wasn't quick the way she was. She could, and sitting with them together was a lot of fun because she would tell him off, because she was so much quicker than him. And it was just wonderful. And he loved it. When she told him off, you could see there was this nitzchuni banai moment, nitzchuni ishti. My wife has defeated me. He just loved it because he loved how brilliant she was. And she was just the most wonderful, kind. We spent a lot of time after he passed away. Nina and I would go have dinner with her frequently because she was so special, so special. So there was the two of them. And what they did for us, by the way, is something very precious, which, God, I hope I passed on to you, is they created a role of a rabbinic family that Nina and I stepped into. And otherwise, I couldn't have done this job. And I told them this, right? And their idea was because she was a professional. First, she was an English professor at Cal State Northridge, and then she was a therapist. And she came to shul when she felt like it. And when she didn't, she didn't. And no one said a word. Like, it wasn't, she was never the Rebbitzin.
Right.
Never called Malka Schulweis. And my wife, Nina, stepped right into that role. And Nina participates in the synagogue. She helps and she does things. But she's not the Rebbitzin. She's not an extension of me. She's her own person. And their kids were independent children. And the wonderful thing is that all three of their kids are very deeply committed Jews, and mine are too. And I thank them for that, because we learn from them never ever to say, do this because your dad's the rabbi, right? Never. And for that reason, their kids grew up to be very healthy. In fact, there was a time when Ethan and Seth first came to synagogue, they dressed like us. They wore jeans and blue work shirts and desert boots. And someone at a board meeting stood up and said, Rabbi, we're very, very upset about the way that your sons are dressing for synagogue on Friday night. And he got up at that meeting, and then he got up on the Friday night afterwards, and he said, I don't care what they wear as long as they show up.
Yeah.
As long as there are young people in the synagogue, you are welcome to wear whatever you want.
Yeah.
Just come and join the community. That philosophy of not only what you wear, whatever you want, but you are whatever you want. Ethan decided to drop out of college and make Aliyah to Israel, right? And he became a kibbutznik. And there were people who said, And he said, my son is building the state of Israel and you're going to criticize him, right? So I mean, you have to understand that they created a rabbinic role for a family that made it healthy for my kids to grow up. And I am so grateful for that, because my kids love Torah like his kids love Torah in Israel, and they never resented it by being a rabbi's kid.
Right.
And your kids will love Torah because your kids are wonderful.
Yeah, they come on when they come, and they run around and wearing their shorts on a whatever, and they're learning how they're learning. I'm grateful that exists, and there are still people who call Vanessa the Rebbitzin, and like she mostly ignores it because you can't balk every time. But the role isn't what maybe it used to be, or maybe what it was at other places.
That's a gift. So I wanted to say something about Malka, because she's such an important part of this story.
Yeah. She walked me down the aisle, right, at ordination.
I was there.
And to think of all the rabbis who shaped me in my life and what it would mean and how do I choose, and then to thinking, wait, Malka, just what an interesting choice. And in my mind, if women were allowed to be rabbis in her generation, right, there are certain women who married rabbis. I think of Blue Greenberg and Leah Schechter, and just so many women who are brilliant. And Malka would have been one of the great leaders, and she became a leader in her own right and a writer, and she was incredible.
And an inspiration to so many.
Yeah.
So many of us, yeah.
Well, thank you. The last question we look to is what are you reading, studying, toying with, fighting with? What text is speaking to you right now?
Oh, that's a lovely question. That's a really lovely question. I don't even know where to start. I'm watching what's happening in this country, and like so many people, I'm profoundly worried. I'm watching what's happening to Israel, internally to Israel, and what's happening to Israel around the world. And I'm deeply, deeply worried about Israel. And then there's the bigger issues on the horizon. I think I'm one of these people that has come to think that AI, artificial intelligence, is about to change everything.
Yeah.
Is about to radically change the texture of our lives, the economy, our social lives, and so many other things. And I'm profoundly worried about that. I worry a lot, as you can tell. Yeah. I'm not just worried about it, but I mean, there are things, tools, but whether we have the wisdom to use these technologies and tools in ways which are productive rather than ways which are destructive gives me tremendous pause. So I'm looking at that and worrying about that going forward, and thinking again about what my tradition teaches me about, think of the Tower of Babel, which is the first technological project of humankind. And God says, I can't let them go ahead with this because it's going to destroy everything. And I wonder whether that's what AI is coming to do. It's a concern of mine. I read a lot about this, and I think a lot about this. So these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about these days.
Yeah, right. And then finding the texts in Judaism, not just Babel. What else? What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to be in relationship with human beings? Because, AI is going to, who knows?
There's another interest. There's a new book out about boys and men. There's a couple of interesting books about boys and men, and the way that as feminism has flowered, which is such a gift to us all, a blessing, boys and men have been left behind. And what happens to them? I mean, it's all of the shooters of all of the catastrophes have been young, lonely, unaccomplished men. And
Right.
there's a class of these people in our culture. So the question is, how do we teach boys not to become destructive? This is another issue that, so I'm looking at these big cultural issues. And what does our faith teach us? What is a Jewish role of masculinity, a Jewish image of masculinity, healthy masculinity? What is a Jewish image of healthy technology? What does the Jewish tradition teach me about how I relate to a world that is so prejudiced against my people and my country and my nation, my homeland? And what does the Jewish tradition and what does the Jewish community need to do to preserve American democracy in a moment when it seems to be being pulled apart on every side? These are the questions that worry me a lot. And on that happy note, I want to thank you for this interview, Ari. It's been really wonderful spending this afternoon with you.
I love spending time with you. I love just getting to hear you and talk with you and hear ideas. I mean, you've been my teacher for most of my life.
And you are one of the proteges that made Rabbi Schulweis so proud. That a kid from our synagogue decided to go into this line of work and do as well as you do. You should know that he was terribly proud of you.
That's very kind. I hope more people are inspired by greatness, getting to hear voices like Schulweis, like yours, like so many others, and go, oh, this is important for the world today, and I'm going to do my best to say something meaningful at some point. Thank you. Always a pleasure.
It's an honor and a pleasure, Avi. Take
All
good
right.
care.
Thank you for listening to the Moral Courage podcast. We are produced by the Harold M. Schulweis Institute at Valley Beth Shalom, which supports these podcasts in addition to educational programs within Valley Beth Shalom, the Schulweis Library, changing exhibitions at the Liner Chapel at VBS, Jewish World Watch, and the Jewish Community Children's Choir. The Moral Courage podcast is hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach. Our consulting producer is Esther Kostanowitz. Our technical producer is Eric Weiser. We are grateful for the support of the Institute and Haley Lazitsky-Weiser at Sadcon Productions. To learn more about Rabbi Schulweis or to make a donation to help support these podcasts, visit the Institute website at hmsi.info.